The role of the agent in theater and films is a vital one in the pursuit of the correct and career-enhancing moves for a client. The agent must decide why, how, and when they do a play, and how about the world of motion pictures in the background. There are many moves required to assure an actor that the property chosen is the right one, and the terms set in a contract are commensurate with the actor's worth. Well, today, we're most pleased to have with us one of the most prolific agents in theater and films, Susan Smith. In today's business of Goliath agencies, the boutique agent with a very personal relationship with their clients is becoming the dinosaur of the entertainment world. Fortunately, Susan Smith is one of the few artist representatives still practicing the craft of agenting with a special understanding of and the difference between what it takes to make a career as opposed to what it takes to just make a buck. With clients like Brian Dennehy, Lynn Redgrave, Kathy Bates, Linda Eamon, Charles Dance, Bob Balaban, to name just a very few, it is her task to guide and advise the path to be taken. She will join us in a discussion of the compass one needs to follow on the long journey in the building of a career, and the chances that should be taken and the traps to be avoided during this journey. It's all about theater and the people that comprise the cast of craftsmen of all talents that make it happen. I am pleased once again to be joined by my colleague and dear friend, Mr. Glenn Casale, who happens to be probably, arguably, one of the best directors in theater and television before we get to Susan Smith. And Glenn, it's good to see you again. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Mike.
I just want to ask you a question. I know that you've been very busy mounting a new production, a touring production of Dr. Dolittle. You want to tell us a little bit about that just for a moment or two, because I think you told me you're starting at the Civic Light Opera in Pittsburgh.
Yes. We're starting this summer. It's a tour. It's booked for 57 weeks on the road. It's interesting. Nowadays, it started with Peter Pan. The producer of Peter Pan started this formula of going out on the road, making your money back, and then going into New York as a stop on the road. If you're successful, you can sit down for a while in New York, but if not, you stop on the road, then you go back out. It's the same formula with Dr. Dolittle. We're starting in Pittsburgh in August. We're teching it in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Knoxville, Tennessee is a good tech town.
For 2.5 weeks. So it does have that feel of that old out-of-town tryout.
Yeah.
And it's being built from scratch. It's Leslie Brickus wrote the book,
Yes.
music and lyrics.
Yes. And you're also doing Beauty and the Beast in Europe, are you not? Or I know that you were there very recently preparing for it.
In Holland. The Disney people came to me and they just released the rights to Beauty and the Beast in America. And I happened to do a production last summer that they saw. And they came to me and want to do my production in Amsterdam. It's going to run a year in Amsterdam, then go to Rome, Spain, and Germany.
One of the best moves they ever made. I'm quite sure that your agent made a very good deal for you.
Yes,
Should have.
and I, you know, we're speaking about agents today. My agent, I've been with my agent since 1986. You know, you build a relationship with a person, and like we're talking about today with Susan, if it's the right agent, and he's been there for me, even when there was those dry times, which we all have, and he has been the kind of person who says, let's set out a 3-year goal, let's set out a 5-year goal, and our relationship becomes good cop, bad cop.
Sure.
He does the negotiating, he takes care of the tough stuff, and I go in and be the artist, and that's the great thing about it.
It's wonderful for whether it be a director or an actor or anybody within the creative field of theater or motion pictures, but we're talking about theater today, to have an agent that understands all the not only niceties but dangers. And today we're fortunate, as I said earlier, to have with us Susan Smith, and we saw her in Los Angeles very recently, so we'd like to go to that little discussion we had with Susan Smith right now.
Great.
We're in Los Angeles, And fortunately, this afternoon, I have the privilege of speaking with a young woman named Susan Smith, who happens to be, I would say, probably one of the primary agents, managers in the theatrical firmament, representing quite a number of personalities, both for stage and screen. And we will be talking with her. And Susan, thank you very, very much for coming.
My
I
pleasure.
appreciate it greatly.
You
And
can
it's good to
tell
see
we're
you
in
again.
L.A., huh?
You can tell we're in LA, yeah, with the backdrop and everything
From the
like
red
that.
curtain.
Of course, it's an
Yes.
LA curtain.
Yes.
One thing I want to ask you to start off with is when you, as an artist representative, have a play, a theater piece presented to you, how do you feel about it? Because now, of course, a great deal of actors are concerned with doing motion pictures because of the money involvement. And the time restrictions on plays can be very limiting. How do you address that? How do you evaluate, well, shouldn't he or she do a play, or shouldn't they do a play, et cetera?
Well, first I read the play, if it's a play that I don't already know. And then secondly, and probably even before that, I evaluate the client so that every client has a different need. Lynn Redgrave adores being on a stage. So as I read something, I'm very clear that that is where she actually prefers to work. Kathy Bates feels she's done the theater. She doesn't want to do theater anymore, particularly. Brian Dennehy has had a whole rebirth in his career because of the theater. So because of that, each person you look at it differently for, but it still is always about what the material is, whether it's a film or a play.
What about if you feel, let us say hypothetically, you take a look at a play and you say to yourself, this play is great for client A or client B, for a number of reasons. Money being excluded, of course,
Right.
but nevertheless, you think that it would be enhance their career, would be a great career move, and they don't want to do it. How do you approach that? If you feel strongly, passionately, that this would definitely be a constructive move, how do you deal with that?
Well, is this a G-rated film or what here? I usually tell them that they're either crazy or full of shit, and they'll listen to me.
That's all right.
I mean, I've done this job for 35 years plus, so there's a different, I kind of have a sort of, a aura that comes with me that people listen to. And if they don't want to listen to me, they should never be represented by me in the first place. But the concept, I think, is that if the actor, however, does not feel right doing the material, that's the first thing that tells you it can't be. And in the long run, of course, it is the performer who's on the stage. I get to sit in the office. But what I do is I lay out why I feel this is a good move, and this is a good move, and this is a good move. When Brian went to the Goodman Theater, now it's about 6 years ago, to do Death of a Salesman, we were laughing, and about a month before he went, he said, I've got to pull out of this play, Susan, because I don't have enough money to go and do it. And we had decided that there was no future life for this play because Dustin had done it on Broadway 15 years prior. And though I saw it and didn't think he was very good, a lot of people remembered it, both either because they didn't like him or they did. And so Brian said, well, I can't. Anyway, I scrambled around and I got him a week on a mini-series, and he finished 3 days before going to Chicago, because I knew that as an artist, he needed to do this play, and he wanted to. So that's what you do. You try to kind of scratch around to make something happen.
But you made him fiscally comfortable for a period of time.
Absolutely, because if he hadn't been, he would have canceled doing the play. And I did feel it was right for him to do the play. And of course, in hindsight, it has worked out. Not only did he win a Tony, he's going into rehearsal in 2 weeks to do it in the West End.
Right.
Yes.
Right. I think that's wonderful, but there are many agents and managers who they say we want to do a play, and the client says no, and that's it.
Right.
But
Well, that's because most agents are terrified of their clients, so they're all sycophantic, so they feel the only way to keep the client is just to yes them to death. I've never subscribed to that principle.
But that doesn't do the client
life.
any good, does it?
Well, I don't think so, but
No,
there
I
actually
agree
are
with you.
some clients who like to be yes to
Oh,
death.
please, I
They're
know.
not represented by me, but there are
Let
a lot
me
of
ask
them
you,
out there.
Let me ask you this question. When you get a play and your client likes it and you like it, you want them to do it, and you, because you have the vast experience to be able to make that judgment, look at it and say, something, I think this would be a great feature. How do you work it in whereby you want your client, yes, if he does the play, but I want to make sure that he has first
Well,
right
you
refusal,
you
et
ask
cetera.
for a right of first refusal, as you've
Yeah.
just said. Most of the time, you'll never get it. So you know, but then you use your logic. If somebody's going to a regional theater and the person is already pretty well known, the chances are that if the play moves, it will move with that person. But there's, or you either say, well, for instance, Lynn was just offered a play in England, but it wasn't in the West End. They told me, oh, but this is sure to come to the West End. Well, from my reading of it, I did not think that. So we had a talk, and she's not going to do it. Because after a while, I think you just sort of get feels about things. It's the same way in television. I've learned over all these years pretty much to be able to read a pilot script and know whether that could be a series that'll get picked up. I mean, it just comes from the practice of doing.
Yeah, to a great extent, you're quite right. Yeah. But let's say when you do a play and you want your client to sign for a play, how do you protect them that if you want to get them out to do a feature or something? Do you work at a,
well, for
do a
instance,
2-week out clause or something of that nature?
No, for instance, Richard Masur is on Broadway now in a play called Democracy. I have an out clause that I built into the contract as I negotiated it for a film or a pilot had to be beyond a certain point of the opening of the play for up to 8 weeks, with the stipulation, though, that he give back the time at the end of his contract if indeed the play was still running. And we're actually probably going to use it because I think he's getting a pilot next week.
And do you get any kind of resistance, if you will, from producers when you present that to them, or do they usually?
Well, they always give it to you a little bit.
Being one I know.
Interestingly, in the Masur negotiation, I asked for another thing which they told me they'd never been asked for in their life, but I always like to do those ones.
Which is?
I asked that if he got into the David Mamet play, which is starting rehearsals right now, of Glengarry Glen Ross, and I knew he was in contention and it was between Richard and 2 other actors for this role, I wanted an out clause to be able to go to another Broadway play. And this they had never, ever heard of.
I never heard of it either,
right.
to be
I
honest
got
with
it.
you. You got it, huh? Good for you. Mm-hmm. You know, Glenn, it's always fascinating to me, and I'm quite sure you may feel the same way, that regardless of how long you and I have been in this industry, you as a director, me as a producer, that when you listen to someone with Susan Smith's vast range of experience, you are always a student of the theater. And I think when you kind of inform yourself through her of the complexities and machinations that go into guiding an artist, it really is quite interesting.
Yeah, I admire agents like Susan. I think that as a director, we're always looking for that star name, that personality that people know, that's a household name, to come in and do the theater just to help box office, to get, you know, people into the seats. They'll know the name, they're putting down $100 or $90 or $75, whatever it is. You want a name that you're going to be secure with, that you're going to walk in the theater, so we're always looking. And it's really hard sometimes to get an agent to understand that this would be a good move for their client. This would be a good opportunity for the client to branch out and change a career, much like she did with Brian Dennehy.
Absolutely. And what you're referring to is an agent of her caliber and understanding and sensitivity toward the shape that a career should take, let's say a year or 2 from now. If all agents were that way, there wouldn't be a need for managers, because managers guide and shape careers, and agents say how much, when, and how. As I said in the opening, you know, it's the shaping of a career and not merely the chasing of the buck.
Absolutely, and that's why everything has shifted in Hollywood. Everybody wants a manager. Everybody's looking for that manager because it's more personal work, because the agencies have gotten too big. Like we talked about earlier with my agent, I've been with my agent so long, he's the head of the agency. But when I call, I talk to him. He takes the time to work with me. He talks about a 3-5 year project for me and sees where I'm going to be next. And he works with me that way. That's why I like him.
That's right. That's as opposed to just getting a job It's really, here we go again, being an architect, if you will, of a career. You know, many times I'm in the process right now, as you know, of trying to get a star for a play I did in England with the Royal Shakespeare Company called School of Night. It's a wonderful thing about Christopher Marlowe. And I call agents to say it's a play, and the next thing usually you see, hear a dial tone, because they don't want to commit their clients to a play. But somebody like Susan Smith understands, wait a minute, maybe it's not right for client B, but for client A, I think he or she should do a play now and build it. And that's the important thing.
Absolutely. And Broadway today has changed for that reason. Now that agents are saying, you know what, Broadway's a good tool for my clients. We're getting a lot more film stars, television stars on Broadway, which is helping the business in general. People are going to see the star and the title of the play. Kathleen Turner, Jessica Lange, Ethan Hawke, they're all on Broadway now, doing what they like doing and doing something that's going to change their career, that's going to let people see a different light of.
It's going to energize their career.
Absolutely.
In many instances, and it should. Of course, there are many agents that finally will say, okay, I'll have him or her do the play, but she can only or he can only give you 2 months. Now, if that only includes rehearsals, you don't have any time to recoup. And the old joke is that I've always used, fine, you'll give him to me, will he do the second act? Or just the first, you know. But they have to be career conscious as opposed to job conscious, right, Glenn?
Yes. And also, we've talked about this before in a couple of the other segments. You get a star, and the star will only commit to 3 months. And if it's star-driven piece, what happens after that 3 months when you have to replace it with a non-star? The box office drops off. So 3 months isn't a lot to recoup your money or anything. You need at least 6. They're going through it with Spamalot now is on Broadway. Big hit. New musical, Monty Python. They've got 4 stars. David Hyde Pierce, Tim Curry,
Azaria.
Hank Azaria. And Hank Azaria is the thing. Hank Azaria has a series on television. So Hank Azaria is only committed until June.
But I think the difference, I think it's a very good point, Glenn. However, I think that the difference between a Spamalot and a star-driven vehicle. Spamalot is not a star-driven vehicle, I don't think. I think the star of Spamalot is the Monty Python legend. As Phantom of the Opera would happen years ago, when it first came to the fore, Andrew Lloyd Webber did a brilliant thing. He had a great British star, a talented, gifted man named Michael Crawford. But he never built Michael Crawford up that big. So when Michael Crawford left, it didn't take a huge dip. The box office stayed steady.
But you see, with Spamalot, it's those 4 TV stars over the title.
Yeah.
Much like the producers with Nathan Lane and Matthew Broderick.
Yeah.
When they left, even though it had Mel Brooks's stamp on it, the box office still dipped down because they wanted to see Matthew Broderick and Nathan Lane.
Well, that's true. It's arguable, though. I still think that it's qualitatively different. I think that Lane and Matthew Broderick ran away with it.
With that
because
show.
It was 2 guys. It was their 2 sons. This instance in Spamalot, these 4 guys are not the central force. The central, and Mike Nichols directed it.
Absolutely.
Mike Nichols is a big attraction. He's always there.
Absolutely.
So it's a different thing. But you see, getting back to Susan Smith and agents of her experience and caliber, they know that they will not be sycophantic. As she pointed out quite correctly, many agents are afraid to or aren't interested enough to fight with a client.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you something. You as a director, you're doing a show, and you want someone. Somebody good, somebody capable, etc. And the producer, me, Mr. Villain, right, says to you, Glenn, I got to give you star so-and-so and so-and-so because he or she will bring in seats. What position do you take when you think that that star selection would be wrong for the overall quality and the overall success of the piece?
First of all, let me say that I understand that whole concept of star-driven material and why you need a star, because you think that'll help sell the tickets. What I feel about it is I weigh it carefully. I see both sides of it. I have a marketing degree undergraduate, so I understand the marketing value of it,
right,
which a lot of directors don't. A lot of directors
why.
won't see that, you know, but I do see the marketing value of it. What I find, though, is I have to be strong and say as much as I can, this is what I feel, these are the problems we'll encounter down the road with this star if I don't agree if the star's right. Sometimes they'll bring up a star and I'll say, okay, fair enough, let me do this. Let's meet with the star. let me work with the star for a while. Let me have a couple of days with the star and see if I can make it work. Because I'm willing, and I go into that very, very much open-minded. I have to.
Well, you have to, yes, you have to, but you also have to acclimate yourself, and your responsibility is for the quality of the piece. You have to maintain the quality of the piece without selling out to commercial interests, you know.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Well, you know, and I find today that American stars have more difficulty coming into the theater because of television and stuff. I wonder if we can ask Susan Smith what she thinks, why it's easier to get a British star or a British actor of note to take a Broadway play rather than an American actor.
That's a very, very good point, and I'm quite sure that she'd be able to answer it. I agree with that question, and I myself have had certain problems as far as American actors as opposed to British actors. So I think we should address that and see what Susan has to say about it.
Good.
The difference, first of all, I think is totally the silliest answer. It's geographical. If you live in England, there's basically one center of the business. It's called London. You can be an actor, you can do a telly in the day, you can do a film in the day, you can do a play at night, and it's fine. That is not what this country is. We have two coasts, and they're very divided. The theater is primarily under the aegis of New York and the East Coast. And the West Coast, as many actors as there are out here, 122,000 members of Screen Actors Guild, they are primarily here to be in film and television. Otherwise, if they were real actors, in my opinion, they'd stay in New York.
Well, then you get people like Ethan Hawke, for example, who's in a play now called Hurly-Burly. And you get Tim Robbins, who does a play. One thing like Al Pacino, for example, I think is an exception to the rule.
Well, he is, you know, but he's also, when he needs to take a break and, like, you know, pay for the care and feeding of his twins, he's got to go and give a chunk and do film. So most actors, they sort of divide up their dance card. I do this with Mr. Dennehy. If you take X amount of time, then you have to give back to me X amount of time for film and television, if indeed you want to support your family. Now, fortunately, at a certain level, like Brian and obviously Al Pacino, or Tim Robbins is a different case because he has his own theater company.
Yeah.
So he does that out of a
And
joy
writes his
and a
own
love.
stuff too, yeah.
And so his is a kind of one-man band a little bit differently. But the other situations are, frankly, you know, Brian has two young kids. They're in grade school, so you know, you got to see that they're going to be able to go to college, and who's going to pay for that? It's called he's going to, and in his case, he's well enough paid by the theater, but it still, of course, is obviously nothing like what the rest of it's about.
Right.
So
that's the aspect of that's what we owe those of us who try to get theater works on. That's the hill we have to climb.
Mm-hmm. Well, for instance, I just read a new play that they wanted Brian for, and I love this play. I think it's an incredibly written piece, and I'm very interested in Brian going to Broadway in a new work. I don't want him just to do O'Neill and the late Arthur Miller. So I was very excited about it. However, the producer wants Brian to commit to going into rehearsal next February. Well, Brian is going to London. He'll play there 6 months, which finishes him November 5. Then you come back, you're not going to get a film or television started because then you've got Thanksgiving and Christmas.
Right.
So therefore you have to take that into the beginning of 2006 or whatever we're at. and then is my chunk to help to pay for the kids' education. So I can't commit to his going into 6-month run or 9 months in a play to go into rehearsal in a year from now.
Well, what's the producer's reaction to that?
Well, the producer, of course, was very upset, and he's an old friend of mine. And I said, look, this isn't anything about not loving the material. This is literally about dividing a pie. And if you look at the pie as 12 months, how many months can you give to theater? And right now, Brian's on tour that I set up of a play that he loves called Trumbo. So I set up what I call a kind of Tourette, not Tourette syndrome, but just a mini tour of about 3 months, and it's a piece he loves, and So, you know, and he's...
I know the play. Well, I would venture to say that a producer, if you as a representative, the artist representative, love the play, and apparently he would too, then I think it's incumbent upon the producer to say, okay, I want him badly enough, when can we do it? Forget about February, how about September?
Here I'm going to now argue the producer's point of view. His backing depends on who he goes to the backers and say, I have either Joe Schwartz or Brian Dennehy, okay? So he's not going to get it by going to say Joe Schwartz loves this play, and he'll commit. So, and then there's all of these option rights that go away, as you well know, if you don't exercise them. Therefore, most of them come with putting down dollars. I mean, unfortunately, Karl Marx was right. This is really all, in my humble opinion, economically driven. All of it is.
Well, of course, unfortunately.
You know,
however, if you have an actor of Brian Dennehy's caliber and stature, there's, and I speak from experience, I think, and I think you'll agree with me, there is no reason why a producer can say to the backers and can say to the people who own the rights, I got Brian Dennehy, but I can't, he's not going to do it until September.
Right. Well, you can say that, and I gave this producer permission to say that, but the thing is that I also can't promise that, because if I have a big film for the winter, Brian's going to take that, because he's going to sit down with his accountant, and the accountant's going to say, okay, now Brian, you've had all your months doing art. We usually divide it called art and commerce, okay, the two fellows walking together. And the concept is to try to meld them as much as you can. And it's very hard, because very few films are really good. There's just no way around that. But sadly, in my opinion, I think the theater is not what it used to be either.
I just continue to be, I guess, amazed at all the information that somebody of Susan Smith's years of experience in the business brings to the fore, just while you and I are listening to her talk about things. It really is amazing. I love the phrase about, I have to see what his dance card is like.
Absolutely. You know, I tell beginning actors when they say, how do I go about getting an agent? What do I look for in an agent? First of all, I think you want to look for somebody that you're going to work with. It's a partnership. If it's not a partnership, there's no reason getting into bed with this person. So I tell them it's also you interviewing the agent as much as the agent interviewing you. Too many actors today are so desperate to get an agent because they think the agent is going to make the job. The agent isn't going to make the job. The agent's going to be a partnership that's going to guide your career, that's going to make the deals, that's going to make the contracts. And I think that's what's so important about somebody like Susan Smith. She goes beyond that just answering the phone call and accepting a job.
Well, you also have to look at the level that the actor is at with regard to their individual careers.
Absolutely.
Because if someone who's very young or starting out feels, as you just put out, articulated very, very well, about the fact that they think they need the agent is vice versa. But the point is that if you are certainly advanced in your career, you have to look for planning. As we said a few moments ago, that's why there are managers.
Absolutely.
And that's why agents like Susan Smith are vitally important. You got to build that career. You got to look at the dance card, which is a wonderful expression she came up with. You could have, you said it before, Glenn, about taking time off and you have to give me back time. Remember you said that to me?
Absolutely. I think that, you know, a lot of times actors, and you'll say to actors, what do you think about doing a play? And they'll say, yeah, I can do the play, but like Susan said, I can't afford to do the play right now. I need to do this film, or I need to do this HBO series that has just come up. It's always going to take precedent because of the dollar. And the theater usually gets hurt by that because we've got to bend to that because we can't match the dollar amount of a film or TV show. There's no way.
Absolutely right. At this moment, I mentioned before that I was doing a play called The School of Night with the Royal Shakespeare Company, which got 11 out of 11 reviews, and you know, I said that already. The point is, there is a theater group in London at present called the Ambassador Theater Group. They own about 6 or 7 theaters. They're not the biggest, Andrew Lloyd Webber is, but nevertheless, they love the play. The lead man who heads the company, it's the greatest play. He saw it when it was on with the RSC, etc. He won't give me a theater or come up with the money until I get a star. Now, England never used to be that way. You see, if we had, the problem is that the American experience in theater has corroded the British experience. Agents over there are getting to be Americanized. If we had agents that thought like Susan Smith, who I guarantee you was influenced by the British structure of thinking about the theater. I'm not denigrating American agents or the American theater. I'm talking about the business aspect of it has come into play so much. Guys like me are having a hard time. I got a great material, I can raise the money, but I got to get star so-and-so.
I'll talk about something that's near and dear to both of our hearts. A few years ago, I was involved in the project of Camelot. They were going to redo Camelot for Broadway. They couldn't get it done unless a star was attached. And we went round and round and round with every star imaginable. It ended up being Liam Neeson.
Yeah.
Well, Liam Neeson wanted his own director. So I go bye-bye because they get Liam Neeson, who can sell the project. They pay us off. A few months later, Liam Neeson gets a film, the project goes south.
You see, what's wrong with that, and I can certainly appreciate, pardon me, I can certainly appreciate and understand the difficult position that a producer is placed in. You get a big star, and the star says to you, I don't like this director, I want to have my director. I swear to you, I'm not grandstanding, I'm not trying to be a big man, because the last time I am, we're all just in the trenches, so to speak. A producer should never allow a star to dictate if he has a director on board. Yes, a star should have director approval. Before you get started, you say, okay, I'm going to have Glenn Casal. This is before the deal is made with you. And they say, well, I don't know who he is, but I know this one and that one. That's different. But I'm saying after a deal has been made, why should an actor, now you and I know, you being a director, you and I know that many times if you give an actor that little bit of an inch, there goes the whole mile and the whole highway.
Right, and on the other side of it, though, you can understand the producer side of it. Liam Neeson would sell Camelot. My name wouldn't be as big as Liam Neeson's. So what comes first, the chicken or the egg?
Well, what comes first is it's incumbent upon the producer, if the producer can, I understand that, being a producer, to convince Liam Neeson that this guy, Glenn Casal, as opposed to your guy, meet with him, talk with him, tell him your views of the play, let him tell you your views of the play and see what happens. Then if it doesn't work out, at least you've made an effort.
Absolutely.
But you can't just say, I want so-so. Okay, you can't do that, because you know what you're doing? You're opening the door to a lot of trouble. And Susan Smith, that kind of an agent, understands the problems inherent within the structure of what a director does, what a producer does, what an actor does, and what a scenic designer does, which you and I will get into in a later video segment.
Absolutely. And you know, the other thing is, the agent has a responsibility to understand, is my client going to do well going out on a tour for 57 weeks, or am I just going to hold out for Broadway? Now, as we talk to people, we were talking about Camelot, a lot of stars, a lot of the agents would say, you know what, my client will do it 1 month in Boston and then into the city.
Right.
I can understand that.
Well, I had that experience with Camelot, as you know. I did the revival of Camelot with the original King Arthur, Richard Burton, who turned out to be probably one of the most delicious, wonderful, cooperative actors I've ever had the pleasure to work with. He went on the road. Could you imagine what we did? We went for limited cities, and we played New York. Originally, we started at the Lincoln Center and played Chicago and played San Francisco. How many people in Chicago ever saw Richard Burton in person? And then after Richard Burton became ill and we replaced him with Richard Harris, who did the movie, it was a totally different situation. It wasn't that. Richard Harris was dying to go to New York. And we told him, we've been to New York with Burton. And he kept hammering New York, New York. We finally went to New York and did not do well.
Right. And today, you know, look how good it would be if we get our stars to go on the road and go to the provinces and go out in the communities, not just for the dollar, just for the sense of bringing theater out to people, and bringing theater out of New York to people.
And they would do big business, and it would be a wonderful experience for them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, but especially if you can connect the right title with a star. Then you've got gold.
You're talking about the perfect marriage of man and material.
Absolutely.
And how many times does that happen?
And I think that's something that Susan Smith looks for. Is this the right marriage between this material and my client that's only going to boost the next phase of my client's career?
You see, I give a career, she looked at it from a very constructive point of view, getting back to Brian Dennehy. when she said that Dustin Hoffman had done Death of a Salesman 15 years before. Many of us have to remember that Dustin Hoffman playing Willy Loman was a total and complete antithesis of what Arthur Miller conceived Willy Loman to be like. Willy Loman in the original, always a blustery kind of a Billy J. Cobb, who was a young guy playing an older guy, always a big guy. And here came this little meek, Dustin Hoffman's a brilliant actor, but he wasn't the Willy Loman that not only people who had seen it, but hadn't seen it conceived it. Brian Dennehy, right on the mark. Look what it did for him.
And Elizabeth Franz playing his wife.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Absolutely.
Brilliant.
Well, it was great casting.
Yeah.
You know, it started in Chicago and went on from there. But the thing is that what you have to understand, or we have to understand, the public has to understand, with the ever-changing structure in the business today, it's all star-driven, and it's difficult. And what you have to do is, if you can make the product, the play, or the musical a star, you're ahead of the game. I mentioned Spamalot before, I thought. You know.
Which we're hoping for with Dr. Dolittle. We sold Dr. Dolittle without a star, 57 weeks. It's booked on the road, no star listed at all.
I want to tell you something, Len, for whatever my opinion is worth, I think you're absolutely right. Because I think the story of Dr. Dolittle, I Sing to the Animals and all that, who remembers the fact that the film was done with Rex Harrison? Dr. Dolittle unto itself is a real star vehicle. Didn't you, what was the thing when going to Beauty and the Beast, the other product you're doing, what happened with Disney and your version as opposed to their version?
Well, Disney released it to North Shore, and it was the first production outside of the city where you couldn't use the Broadway blocking, the Broadway costumes, the Broadway set. All you could use was the music and lyrics. They said, would you come and do this and recreate it? So I went back to the 15th century novel, went back and made it more of a romantic spectacle, not a kid's musical. I didn't have to base it on the cartoon, which the original creators had to base it on the cartoon.
But that gives you more freedom, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So I go up to North Shore and do it, and the Disney theatrics people came to see it and bought it for Holland. And now, same thing in Holland, though. They're putting stars in it.
Well, you see, that's happening. It's contaminating the atmosphere.
Absolutely.
But that's the way we have to do it.
But you know what? It goes back to, in Holland, it's regional theaters. It goes around the region. Here, our regional theaters have become so much more important to the growth of the theater. Not only to the growth of the theater, but as a stepping stone, not only to Broadway, but to feature films. I wonder if Susan Smith would know, what's the importance of regional theater today to their actors?
Why don't we look at it and see what her view of regional theater is in the theater today?
Well, I find that young actors, I still believe this, should, unless they have no interest in the theater whatsoever, and then of course I kind of wonder why they want to be actors, but they want to be actors to get a hit TV series and make a lot of money.
Or become a big movie star.
Right. I still think young actors should actually go and park their bums at good regional theaters and do 2, 3, 4 years, really get solid parts under their belt and know what really acting is.
How many are willing to do that?
Well, very few nowadays. I represent an actress in New York named Linda Emond, who is just now starting to have a film career. She has become sort of the darling of the New York stage. She did the Tony Kushner play a couple years ago called Homebody Kabul and won sort of every award that there was. Now, people said to me, actually I just had dinner last night with the producer of 6 Feet Under, and he said, oh, you have Linda Emond. Oh, wow, I just, I love her. And I said, yes, I've had Linda Emond for 15 years.
That's all.
But, she worked in Chicago at the Goodman and at Steppenwolf and at Wisdom Bridge. She, learned her trade there. She came to LA for a year or two. She hated it here, as do a lot of people. I've never liked it myself, so I'm the last person to try to convince an actor to stay here particularly. I sent her off actually to Ashland, Oregon for 2 years because she never really had done a lot of Shakespeare.
Ashland, the Shakespeare Festival, right.
She stayed there for 2 years, and then 7 years ago, I said to her, okay, now is the time for you to go to New York. Now her thing is totally, in a way, bass-ackwards. And now she has this kind of burgeoning career, and now the people in movies are just beginning to discover her She starts a film actually in 3 weeks with Charlize Theron and Fran McDormand. So,
but you see, what you're describing now is what most actors should be concerned with, and it fits into the repertory thing. You said, as a creative representative, go to Ashland. How many representatives, agents would do that? God forbid.
well, I also have to tell you, credit to Linda Eamon, how many actors
That's
would
right.
do it.
Okay.
Because
But that's
I don't
what-
think most of them will. Everything in this country now is all about hurry up and quickly, and how fast can I be a star, and how quickly can I get this series so that everybody knows who I am, and then I can make a lot of money. I mean, it's all, you know,
There is no pursuit of craft.
absolutely none.
And that's the problem.
And that's a word now just left to England.
Okay.
People don't do
So
the
we
word
have to,
craft
thank
here.
God there are people
Craft
like
services.
you. Okay, yeah. But seriously, thank God there are people like you who can at least still guide, if you will, actors into the right kind of situation whereby they become solid performers.
But Mike, I represent a dying breed. I don't even know if there are 2 or 3 of me even left.
Yeah.
Trust me. And I, having done this so many years, and only having worked for myself, which I was very clear that that was the path I wanted. I've never wanted to work with a large company. Because of that, I do things my own way just because that's who I am, and I'm ornery. But that isn't how it works today.
Oh, I know that. I know
And,
that.
you know, most people, when they have a job at a company, they have to book a certain amount of money, or they don't have a job at that company for too long.
Well, you talk about the big agencies. I
Sure.
mean, that's what they don't
But
want to
now,
listen to it.
everybody wants to be at a big agency. There are no real small boutique agencies anymore. Maybe there's 2 or 3. That's totally out the window. Because, first of all, the economics are such that it's very tough to be a boutique agency and to tell an actor, no, you go off to the Goodman for 6 months and whatever.
It's very tough to be a creative producer, if I can use that word, because in many agencies, the big ones, and I don't have to tell you who they are, they all have letters instead of names. You mentioned theater, and suddenly you hear a dial tone. And on that note, I just want to thank you very, very much for being with us.
Oh, it's
and
my
for
pleasure.
enlightening
pleasure.
our student audiences. And
But if
to
you
me,
really are actors and you really feel you're an actor, go do the stage. At least try it first for a year or 2.
absolutely right. God bless you. I need people like you. And thank you very much, Susan.
Oh, it's
Greatly
my
appreciate
pleasure.
it. You know, isn't it gratifying, Glenn, that an agent like Susan Smith, we've been saying this all along, in her last few remarks, she said she advises her clients to do live theater.
I love it.
Makes you a better actor,
love
makes
it.
you a better performer.
I love it. It also gives such a strength to an actor. It gives them, even when I've done television and I see theater actors come into the television set, it's a much better experience. They know how to put thoughts together. They're not just working from line to line to line. They know how to build an arc of the character, all of that stuff that goes along with it.
Not only that, the terminology arc, which has become, you know, prominent in both television and film, but it also allows an actor to sustain a characterization.
Absolutely.
If you do only film, you do it, you know, a blip here, a segment there, etc., and you really, it's harder to get into it. But it's wonderful training, and I just hope it never disappears. As long as we have agents or managers or artist representatives like Susan Smith, we'll be in better shape.
And you know what's interesting about Susan Smith too? She gets us into what we call today creative negotiations.
Yeah, creative
with
negotiations.
with the contracts. I mean, the thing she said about having an out for Richard Mazer. It's important that we all know up front what that is. And you know, even when I work out a contract for myself, I work out billing. Early on in my career, I never thought billing, who cares about billing? I'm looking at the dollar. My agent taught me, look at billing. Look at what they're going to do with your name. Look at what's going to happen when it goes farther. What are you going to own as far as the property later on? All of that creative, contractual business is so important today.
Absolutely, and an out clause. The
Absolutely.
terminology out clause. When can you get out if something happens? Can you get out in 2 weeks? Can't you? If you have a run-of-the-play contract and you want to get out, what happens to you then? What do you have to give up? How much money do you have to give up? How does a producer, from a producer's point of view? When I did Camelot many years ago with Richard Burton, we had a young lady from the chorus who sang beautifully and couldn't say hello on stage. And Burton didn't care. I mean, she just couldn't. I mean, we had to get rid of her. but somebody who was a manager or whatever signed a run-of-the-play contract. The terminology I apply to that is don't ask.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Don't ask.
But the contract today is such a big thing, and I think an agent has to have the foresight to see what's going to happen with the project.
Sure.
Because later on you can't go back in and renegotiate.
You got to anticipate the problems. And that only comes about not only with a basic form of intelligence, but it comes about with experience. That's why Susan Smith, who's been through it, who's probably been wounded a few times,
Absolutely.
Can go through it and handle it very, very well.
And I think it's fascinating that the producers did allow her to have an out for another Broadway show.
Good for her. I said good for her.
Absolutely.
It is good for her.
And you know, understandable. And I think that an actor of Richard Macer's quality and stature, the producer's going to want him in both plays, because in democracy you need that kind of actor.
You know, she's a tough negotiator and a tough agent. Tough, no producer should mind. Difficult and unreasonable, forget about it. That's tough. That's murder to deal with. Tough is fine, because it brings a producer up to a certain level.
And you respect that as a producer.
No question, because you can deal with something on a better level.
Absolutely, because they communicate what they need. And if they communicate what they need honestly and up front, it's easy to deal with.
Absolutely. And later on in future shows that we will do, we're going to talk about maybe managers, we're going to talk with directors and scenic designers, but it's all interwoven into the fabric of what theater is about.
Absolutely.
Because you know, as a director, a scenic designer has to be able to get your vision and the playwright's vision visually across. Consequently, nobody can be independent. Nobody goes into a room by themselves and hides away. And anyway, I really feel that our audiences can benefit from this, and it's the people that we meet and the problems that we face and the solutions that we discover that make it much more interesting and much more vital and much more meaningful in the long run to what it takes to producing for the theater. And we'll see you again very, very soon. Glenn Casale and I want to thank you for being with us, and we'll be back with more interesting aspects of the theater.